Welcome to a peaceful journey through the magnificent story of life on Earth, a tale that spans billions of years and encompasses countless transformations, adaptations, and wonders that have shaped the living world we see around us today. As you relax and allow your mind to drift into a restful state, let these facts about evolution and the history of life gently flow through your consciousness, painting pictures of ancient worlds, remarkable creatures, and the intricate processes that have guided the development of all living things on our planet. Our story begins approximately 4.5 billion years ago, when Earth itself was forming from the cosmic dust and debris swirling around our young sun. In those earliest days, our planet was a hostile, volcanic world, nothing like the blue and green oasis we know today. The surface was molten rock, bombarded constantly by asteroids and comets from space, and the atmosphere contained no oxygen, instead being filled with gases like methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Yet even in this seemingly inhospitable environment, the stage was being set for one of the universe's most extraordinary phenomena, the emergence of life itself. As you breathe slowly and deeply, imagine the Earth gradually cooling over millions of years. The relentless bombardment from space began to diminish, and the surface started to solidify into the first rocky crust. Water vapor in the atmosphere condensed, falling as rain for perhaps thousands of years, creating the first oceans that would become the cradle of life. These ancient seas were very different from today's oceans, filled with dissolved minerals and organic compounds that had been delivered by comets or created through chemical reactions powered by lightning, volcanic activity, and ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Somewhere in these primordial waters, approximately 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, the first simple life forms appeared. These weren't anything like the plants and animals we're familiar with, but rather microscopic single-celled organisms, possibly similar to bacteria. The exact process by which non-living chemistry became living biology remains one of science's most fascinating questions, but we know that somehow molecules began to organize themselves into self-replicating systems capable of metabolism, growth, and evolution. These first cells were likely chemotrophs, organisms that derived energy from chemical reactions rather than sunlight, thriving near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where mineral-rich water provided the energy and raw materials they needed. For nearly 2 billion years, life on Earth remained microscopic and relatively simple, consisting entirely of single-celled prokaryotes, organisms without a defined nucleus or complex internal structures. Yet even during this seemingly quiet period, evolution was hard at work, and one of the most important developments in Earth's history was taking place. Some of these early microorganisms evolved the ability to perform photosynthesis, using energy from sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and oxygen. These photosynthetic bacteria, particularly cyanobacteria, began to multiply and spread throughout the oceans, and as they did, they slowly but steadily released oxygen as a waste product of their metabolism. This gradual oxygenation of Earth's atmosphere, known as the Great Oxidation Event, fundamentally transformed our planet. It occurred roughly 2.5 billion years ago and represented a catastrophic change for many organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, as oxygen was actually toxic to them. However, this crisis created opportunities for new forms of life that could not only tolerate oxygen, but actually use it to generate energy more efficiently through a process called aerobic respiration. The increasing oxygen levels also led to the formation of the ozone layer in the upper atmosphere, which would eventually shield the Earth's surface from harmful ultraviolet radiation, making it possible for life to eventually colonize the land. As you continue to relax, let your mind drift forward through time to approximately 2 billion years ago, when another revolutionary development occurred. Complex cells called eukaryotes emerged, possessing internal membrane-bound structures, including a nucleus that housed their genetic material, mitochondria that produced energy, and in the case of photosynthetic eukaryotes, chloroplasts that captured sunlight. The leading theory explaining the origin of these organelles is endosymbiosis, which proposes that mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free-living bacteria that were engulfed by larger cells and, instead of being digested, formed a mutually beneficial partnership with their hosts. This relationship became so intimate that these once-independent organisms became permanent residents, eventually losing the ability to live on their own. For hundreds of millions of years more, life remained aquatic and largely microscopic, but the appearance of eukaryotic cells set the stage for the next great leap in complexity. Around 600 to 800 million years ago, some single-celled eukaryotes began to stick together after dividing, forming colonies. Over time, cells within these colonies began to specialize, taking on different roles, and gradually, true multicellular organisms evolved. These early multicellular life forms were simple and soft-bodied, living on the ocean floor, and perhaps resembling modern sponges or jellyfish in some ways. The fossil record from this period is sparse because soft-bodied organisms rarely fossilize. But we do have evidence of these early animals from sites like the Ediacaran Hills in Australia, where impressions of strange, quilted and frond-like creatures have been preserved in ancient rocks. These Ediacaran organisms lived in a peaceful world without predators, simply absorbing nutrients from the water or possibly photosynthesizing through symbiotic relationships with bacteria. However, this tranquil existence was about to change dramatically. Approximately 541 million years ago, a period known as the Cambrian explosion began, representing one of the most significant events in the history of life on Earth. Over a relatively short span of perhaps 20 to 25 million years, an extraordinary diversification of animal life occurred, with most of the major animal groups we recognize today making their first appearance in the fossil record. During this time, animals evolved hard parts like shells, teeth, and armor, which not only improved their chances of fossilization, giving us a much better record of this period, but also reflected the advent of predation and the evolutionary arms race between hunters and hunted. The oceans of the Cambrian period teemed with an bewildering variety of creatures, many of which seem bizarre to our modern eyes. There were trilobites, armored arthropods that would dominate the seas for the next 270 million years, with their distinctive segmented bodies and compound eyes. Strange predators like Anomalocaris, which could grow up to 3 feet long, making it a giant by the standards of the time, used grasping appendages to catch prey, and a circular mouth ringed with plates to crush them. There were also early chordates, ancestors of all animals with backbones, including ourselves, though these were simple, fish-like creatures without true bones or jaws. As you sink deeper into relaxation, envision the Ordovician period, which followed the Cambrian, beginning about 485 million years ago. During this time, the first vertebrates, the earliest fish, appeared in the oceans. These primitive fish lacked jaws and were covered in bony armor, using sucker-like mouths to feed on the ocean floor or filter feed from the water. The seas continued to diversify, with the rise of many types of invertebrates including the first coral reefs, which were built not by the corals we know today, but by different organisms including algae, sponges, and various colonial animals. But while the oceans were full of life, the land remained largely barren and silent. The first pioneers to venture onto dry ground were not animals but plants, or rather, their ancestors. Around 470 million years ago, during the Ordovician period, simple green algae began to adapt to life at the water's edge, and eventually, some made the transition to land. These first land plants were small, moss-like organisms without true roots, stems, or leaves, clinging to moist rocks and soil near water sources. They faced tremendous challenges on land, including desiccation, lack of structural support without the buoyancy of water, and the need to reproduce without water to carry their gametes. Over millions of years, plants evolved solutions to these problems, developing waxy coatings to retain moisture, vascular tissues to transport water and nutrients, and eventually, seeds that could survive in dry conditions. By the Silurian period, which began around 444 million years ago, plants were becoming more diverse and spreading further inland. The first vascular plants appeared, with specialized tissues that could transport water from the soil upward and sugars from photosynthesizing parts downward, allowing them to grow taller and compete for sunlight. With plants colonizing the land, other organisms soon followed. Arthropods, including ancestors of modern insects, spiders, and centipedes, began to venture onto land, probably first as scavengers feeding on decaying plant matter and each other. These early land arthropods had to evolve ways to breathe air rather than extracting oxygen from water, support their bodies against gravity, and prevent their bodies from drying out. The Devonian period, often called the Age of Fishes, began about 419 million years ago and saw tremendous diversification of fish in the oceans. This was when fish with jaws, called gnathostomes, became dominant, representing a major evolutionary innovation that allowed for more diverse feeding strategies including active predation. Some fish evolved into heavily armored forms called placoderms, while others became the ancestors of modern sharks and rays. Most significantly for the future history of life, some fish evolved a very special adaptation: fleshy, lobed fins supported by bone that could be used to prop themselves up on the bottoms of shallow pools and swamps. These lobe-finned fish, living in environments that sometimes dried up seasonally, faced strong selective pressure to be able to survive brief periods out of water. Over many generations, some of these fish evolved primitive lungs, initially as supplements to their gills, allowing them to gulp air from the surface. Their fleshy fins gradually became stronger and more limb-like, capable of supporting the animal's weight for short periods. Approximately 375 million years ago, some of these fish had evolved enough to be considered the first tetrapods, four-limbed vertebrates. Creatures like Tiktaalik, known from fossils found in Arctic Canada, show a beautiful intermediate stage in this transition, with fish-like features including scales and fins, but also tetrapod characteristics such as a neck, a flat skull, and sturdy fin bones that resemble limb bones. By the late Devonian and into the Carboniferous period, which began about 359 million years ago, tetrapods had fully transitioned to land, though most still lived near water and returned to it to reproduce. These early amphibians diversified into many forms, from small, salamander-like creatures to large, crocodile-like predators. The Carboniferous period is particularly notable for the vast coal swamp forests that covered much of the Earth's tropical regions. Formed by enormous trees, including club mosses and horsetails, that grew to heights of over 100 feet. The warm, humid climate and high oxygen levels, which reached about 35% compared to today's 21%, allowed arthropods to grow to enormous sizes. Dragonfly-like insects with wingspans of over 2 feet patrolled the skies, and millipedes longer than a human grew to 6 feet. The abundance of plant life during the Carboniferous period led to massive carbon sequestration, as dead trees and plants accumulated faster than they could decay, eventually being buried and compressed over millions of years to form the coal deposits that powered the Industrial Revolution. This burial of carbon may have contributed to a gradual cooling of the climate, as carbon dioxide was removed from the atmosphere, leading to the formation of ice caps at the poles and a shift toward cooler, drier conditions. As the climate changed heading into the Permian period, which began about 299 million years ago, the amphibians that had dominated began to face competition from a new group of vertebrates. The amniotes, animals that could lay eggs on land with a protective shell and internal membranes that kept the developing embryo from drying out. This evolutionary innovation freed these animals from dependence on water for reproduction, allowing them to colonize even dry environments far from lakes and streams. The amniotes split into two major lineages: the synapsids, which would eventually give rise to mammals, and the sauropsids, which would lead to reptiles, dinosaurs, and birds. During the Permian period, synapsids were the dominant land vertebrates. These included sail-backed pelycosaurs like Dimetrodon, often mistakenly thought of as a dinosaur, though it was actually more closely related to mammals, and lived tens of millions of years before dinosaurs appeared. Later synapsids, called therapsids, became increasingly mammal-like, with more efficient gaits, better teeth for processing food, and possibly even hair and warm-bloodedness. Though evidence for these soft tissue features is harder to find in fossils. The Permian period ended approximately 252 million years ago with the most catastrophic extinction event in Earth's history, known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, or the Great Dying. This event, likely triggered by massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia, released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and toxic gases into the atmosphere, causing severe global warming, ocean acidification, and oxygen depletion in the seas. Approximately 90 to 95% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species went extinct, and life on Earth came perilously close to being wiped out entirely. The recovery from this extinction took millions of years, but life proved remarkably resilient. The Triassic period, beginning about 252 million years ago, saw the emergence of many new groups of organisms. In the oceans, new types of marine reptiles evolved, including ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, filling the ecological roles left vacant by the extinction. On land, the dominant vertebrates for much of the Triassic were not dinosaurs but various archosaurs, the group that includes dinosaurs, crocodilians, and pterosaurs. However, small dinosaurs did appear late in the Triassic, around 230 million years ago, initially occupying relatively minor ecological roles as small predators and herbivores. Also during the Triassic, the first true mammals appeared, evolving from small therapsid ancestors. These early mammals were tiny, shrew-like creatures, mostly nocturnal, and they would remain relatively small and ecologically marginal for the next 150 million years, while dinosaurs dominated the land. Despite their limited diversity, these early mammals were evolving many of the characteristics that would later prove advantageous, including warm-bloodedness, hair, specialized teeth for different functions, and, in most species, live birth with mothers nursing their young. Let your mind drift now into the Jurassic period, which began about 201 million years ago following another major extinction event at the end of the Triassic. This is when dinosaurs truly came into their own, diversifying into a spectacular array of forms and sizes, and dominating terrestrial ecosystems across the globe. The climate during much of the Jurassic was warm and humid, with high sea levels and lush vegetation, including the first flowering plants appearing toward the end of the period, though conifers, Ferns and cycads were more common. Dinosaurs ranged from the tiny, chicken-sized Compsognathus to the enormous sauropods like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, which could weigh up to 80 tons and stretch over 100 feet in length, making them among the largest land animals ever to walk the earth. These giant herbivores browsed on treetop vegetation, using their long necks to reach food sources inaccessible to other animals. Predatory theropod dinosaurs ranged from small, agile hunters to large predators like Allosaurus, which could grow to 30 feet long and hunted even the largest herbivores. One of the most significant evolutionary developments of the Jurassic period was the appearance of birds. Around 150 million years ago, a small feathered dinosaur called Archaeopteryx lived in what is now Germany, possessing a mosaic of dinosaurian features like teeth, a long bony tail, and clawed fingers, combined with avian characteristics including feathers and wings. For many years, Archaeopteryx was considered the first bird, though we now know that feathers evolved earlier in the theropod dinosaur lineage, probably initially for insulation or display rather than flight, and that the transition from non-flying dinosaurs to flying birds was gradual, with many intermediate forms. Birds are, in fact, living dinosaurs, the only lineage of dinosaurs to survive to the present day. The Cretaceous period, Earth's last age of dinosaurs, began about 145 million years ago and would last until the mass extinction 66 million years ago. This period saw the continued diversification and dominance of dinosaurs, including the appearance of famous species like Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the largest terrestrial carnivores ever, Triceratops with its massive frill and 3 horns, and numerous duck-billed hadrosaurs. The Cretaceous climate was generally warm, with higher sea levels than today, creating vast inland seas and archipelagos. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, diversified extensively during this period, transforming the landscape and co-evolving with pollinating insects, particularly bees and butterflies, which appeared during this time. Marine life in the Cretaceous seas was equally impressive, with giant marine reptiles including mosasaurs, which could grow up to 50 feet long, and enormous sea turtles. The oceans teemed with ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of modern squid and octopuses, and fish including early sharks and bony fish that would eventually give rise to most modern fish families. However, this age of giants came to an abrupt end 66 million years ago, when a catastrophic event occurred that would reshape life on Earth. An asteroid approximately 6 miles in diameter struck the Earth near what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. The impact created a crater over 100 miles wide, triggered massive earthquakes and tsunamis, and ejected such vast amounts of debris into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun for months or even years. Global temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis largely ceased, and food chains collapsed. Approximately 75% of all species went extinct, including all non-avian dinosaurs, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, pterosaurs, ammonites, and countless other organisms. Yet from this devastation, new opportunities arose for the survivors. The Paleogene period, beginning immediately after the extinction, saw the rapid diversification of mammals, which had been small and inconspicuous during the age of dinosaurs. With the disappearance of large dinosaurian competitors and predators, mammals quickly evolved to fill newly available ecological niches. Within just 10 million years, mammals had diversified from small, shrew-like creatures into forms as varied as large herbivores, predators, and even early whales that had returned to the sea. Birds, the survivors of the dinosaur lineage, also underwent rapid diversification, evolving into the incredible variety we see today. From tiny hummingbirds to enormous flightless birds that briefly served as major predators in some ecosystems. The Paleogene climate was generally warm, with tropical forests extending to high latitudes, and flowering plants continued to diversify, developing the complex ecosystems we associate with modern forests. As you relax even more deeply, envision the Eocene epoch, roughly 56 to 34 million years ago, when the climate was so warm that palm trees grew in Alaska and crocodile-like creatures lived near the North Pole. During this time, the first representatives of many modern mammal orders appeared, including the earliest horses, which were actually about the size of small dogs, elephants, and the first primates. These early primates were small, tree-dwelling animals, adapted for life in the tropical forests that covered much of the world, with grasping hands, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and relatively large brains. The climate began to cool at the end of the Eocene, and this cooling trend continued through the Oligocene epoch. Grasslands began to expand, and many mammal groups adapted to these new open habitats, evolving longer legs for running and teeth better suited to grinding tough grasses. Horses evolved from small, multi-toed browsers to larger, single-toed grazers. Elephants grew larger and developed their distinctive trunks. Carnivorous mammals diversified into the groups we're familiar with today, including early cats, dogs, and bears. The Miocene epoch, from about 23 to 5 million years ago, saw further expansion of grasslands and the evolution of many animals adapted to open environments. This was when the ancestors of modern humans were diverging from the ancestors of modern apes. The last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees lived sometime during this epoch, probably between 6 and 8 million years ago. After this split, our lineage, called hominins, began evolving distinctive characteristics including adaptations for upright walking, changes in dentition, and eventually, increased brain size. The earliest members of our evolutionary lineage, such as Sahelanthropus and Ardipithecus, lived in Africa between 7 and 4 million years ago and showed a mosaic of ape-like and human-like features, including evidence of bipedalism, though they likely still spent significant time in trees. Around 4 million years ago, Australopithecus species appeared, more committed bipeds with human-like lower bodies, but still relatively small brains and ape-like upper bodies adapted for climbing. The famous fossil Lucy, belonging to the species Australopithecus afarensis, dates to about 3.2 million years ago and provides valuable evidence about how our ancestors moved and lived. The climate continued to cool through the Pliocene and into the Pleistocene epoch, which began about 2.6 million years ago and is characterized by repeated glacial periods, or ice ages, interspersed with warmer interglacial periods. During the coldest phases, vast ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. Sea levels dropped significantly as water was locked up in ice, and many organisms adapted to the cold conditions or migrated toward the equator. This was the age of megafauna, giant versions of many modern animals including mammoths and mastodons, giant ground sloths that could weigh several tons, saber-toothed cats, and enormous bears. It was during the Pleistocene that the genus Homo appeared, around 2.8 million years ago. These early humans had larger brains than Australopithecus and were the first to make and use stone tools systematically. Different species of Homo coexisted and evolved, including Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, and eventually Homo sapiens, our own species, which appeared in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. Homo erectus was particularly successful and long-lived, existing from about 2 million years ago until as recently as 100,000 years ago, and was the first hominin to spread widely outside Africa, reaching as far as Southeast Asia and Indonesia. These early humans were using fire, creating more sophisticated stone tools, and possibly engaging in cooperative hunting of large animals. Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, evolved in Europe and Western Asia and were superbly adapted to Ice Age conditions, with stocky bodies that conserved heat. Large brains equal to or exceeding modern human brain size, and sophisticated cultures that included burial of their dead, creation of art, and use of symbolic objects. For a time, Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted and even interbred, and most people of non-African descent today carry some Neanderthal DNA as evidence of this ancient mixing. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved sophisticated language, complex social structures, advanced tool technologies, and remarkable behavioral flexibility that allowed them to adapt to virtually every environment on Earth. Beginning around 70,000 years ago, modern humans began to spread out of Africa, reaching the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Wherever they went, they brought with them new technologies, artistic traditions, and symbolic thinking. Cave paintings in France and Indonesia, some dating back over 40,000 years, provide stunning evidence of the creative and symbolic capabilities of our ancestors. The ability of humans to modify their environments, develop agriculture, domesticate animals, and create complex civilizations represents a new kind of evolution, cultural evolution, operating far faster than biological evolution. Around 10,000 years ago, groups of humans in several parts of the world independently developed agriculture, transitioning from hunting and gathering to farming and settled life. This agricultural revolution allowed for larger populations, more complex societies, and eventually the development of cities, writing, and the technological world we inhabit today. Throughout all of these epochs and eras, from the very first cells to modern humans, evolution has operated through the same basic mechanisms. At its core, evolution occurs when there is variation among individuals in a population, when some of that variation is heritable, meaning it can be passed from parents to offspring, and when individuals with certain variations have better survival and reproduction than others. These principles, first systematically described by Charles Darwin in his 1859 book on the origin of species, explain the diversity and adaptation of all life on Earth. The source of variation is primarily genetic mutation, random changes in the DNA sequence that occur during cell division, or can be caused by environmental factors like radiation or chemicals. Most mutations are neutral or harmful, but occasionally, a mutation provides an advantage in a particular environment, and individuals carrying that mutation may be more likely to survive and reproduce, passing the beneficial mutation to their offspring. Over many generations, advantageous mutations can spread through a population, and populations can change significantly, sometimes splitting into entirely new species. Natural selection, the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in their traits, is a major driver of evolution, but it's not the only one. Genetic drift, random changes in the frequency of traits due to chance events, can be particularly important in small populations. Gene flow, the movement of genes between populations through migration, can introduce new variations and prevent populations from diverging too much. Sexual selection, where traits evolve because they make individuals more attractive to potential mates or better able to compete with rivals for mates, can lead to elaborate ornaments and behaviors, like the peacock's tail or the complex songs of birds. The study of evolution draws upon evidence from many different fields of science, each providing different windows into the history and processes of life. Paleontology, the study of fossils, provides direct evidence of organisms that lived in the past and documents how life forms have changed over time. The fossil record, though incomplete, clearly shows a progression from simple to more complex organisms, the appearance of new groups and the extinction of others, and transitional forms that bridge major evolutionary changes, such as tiktaalik between fish and tetrapods, or Archaeopteryx between dinosaurs and birds. Comparative anatomy reveals that organisms with very different lifestyles often have similar underlying structures, called homologous structures, suggesting they inherited these structures from a common ancestor. The bones in a human arm, a whale's flipper, a bird's wing, and a bat's wing all have the same basic arrangement of bones, modified for different functions. This makes sense if these animals all descended from a common ancestor with the same basic limb structure, but would be puzzling if each was created independently. Embryology shows that organisms that are quite different as adults often look very similar in early developmental stages, suggesting common ancestry. All vertebrate embryos, for instance, have gill slits and tails at some point in development, even though most do not have these features as adults. This reflects the fact that development tends to conserve ancient patterns, with modifications accumulating over evolutionary time. Biogeography, the study of the distribution of organisms around the world, provides compelling evidence for evolution. Islands, particularly remote ones like the Galapagos or Hawaii, often have unique species found nowhere else, but these species are clearly related to species on the nearest mainland, suggesting they descended from mainland colonizers that then evolved in isolation. Continental patterns also make sense in light of evolution and plate tectonics. The distinctive animals of Australia, including marsupials like kangaroos and monotremes like the platypus, reflect that continent's long isolation from other landmasses, allowing its fauna to evolve independently. Molecular biology has revolutionized our understanding of evolution, providing powerful new tools to study evolutionary relationships and processes. DNA sequencing allows scientists to directly compare the genetic material of different organisms, and the patterns of similarity and difference align beautifully with predictions from evolutionary theory. Organisms that appear more similar based on anatomy and fossils also tend to have more similar DNA sequences, and the degree of genetic difference between species roughly correlates with how long ago they shared a common ancestor, as estimated from fossils and other evidence. All living organisms use the same basic genetic code, with DNA composed of the same 4 nucleotide bases and the same system for translating DNA sequences into proteins. Strong evidence that all life shares a common ancestor. The more closely related two species are, the more similar their DNA sequences, a pattern that allows scientists to construct detailed evolutionary trees showing how different species are related. Humans and chimpanzees share about 99% of their DNA, reflecting our recent common ancestry, while humans and mice share about 85%, and humans and fruit flies about 60%, reflecting more distant relationships. Molecular clocks, which use the rate of genetic mutations to estimate when different lineages split from common ancestors, have provided new ways to date evolutionary events, often confirming but sometimes revising estimates based on fossils alone. These techniques have revealed surprising relationships, such as the finding that whales are most closely related to hippopotamuses among living animals, an inference strongly supported by fossils of early whales, showing progressive adaptations for aquatic life. The evolution of whales themselves provides a beautiful example of how different lines of evidence combine to tell an evolutionary story. Modern whales are fully aquatic mammals, some of the largest animals ever to exist, with body shapes and lifestyles radically different from land mammals. Yet they breathe air, nurse their young, and have mammalian anatomy, clearly indicating they evolved from land-dwelling ancestors. Fossil discoveries have filled in this transition remarkably well. Around 50 million years ago, four-legged mammals like Pachycetus lived near water and may have hunted fish, but could still walk on land. Later forms like Ambulocetus, whose name means walking whale, were more adapted for swimming but still had functional legs. Dorudon and Basilosaurus from around 40 million years ago were fully aquatic, but still had tiny, non-functional hind legs, evolutionary remnants of their walking ancestors. Modern whales retain pelvic bones buried in their bodies, vestiges of their land-dwelling past, and sometimes individuals are born with small external hind limbs. Atavisms revealing their evolutionary heritage. Evolution is not a linear progression from simple to complex or from primitive to advanced, nor does it have a goal or direction. It is instead a branching process, with lineages splitting, evolving in response to their environments, and sometimes going extinct. Most species that have ever lived are now extinct, and mass extinctions have repeatedly pruned the tree of life, eliminating dominant groups and allowing others to flourish. Yet life has always recovered, diversifying into new forms and filling ecological roles left vacant by extinction. Understanding evolution helps us make sense of the natural world in countless ways. It explains why organisms have the features they do, why diseases evolve resistance to drugs, why invasive species can wreak such havoc when introduced to new environments, and why conservation of genetic diversity within species is important for their long-term survival. Evolution is the foundation of modern biology, the unifying theory that connects all biological disciplines and explains the unity and diversity of life. As you drift further towards sleep, reflect on the incredible journey that has brought us to this moment. Every living thing around you, from the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, from the oldest tree to your own body, is the product of billions of years of evolution. Descended from that first spark of life in Earth's ancient oceans. The air you breathe was created by photosynthetic organisms. The cells in your body contain mitochondria that were once free-living bacteria. And your DNA carries echoes of ancestors stretching back through the entirety of life's history on Earth. You are related, however distantly, to every other living thing on this planet. You share approximately 50% of your DNA with bananas, reflecting the common origin of all eukaryotic cells. You share even more with other animals, and with your fellow mammals, you share the legacy of ancestors who survived the extinction of the dinosaurs and radiated into countless forms. With your fellow primates, you share adaptations for life in trees, forward-facing eyes, grasping hands, and complex social behaviors. With your fellow humans, you share a recent common ancestry in Africa, the ability to use complex language, and the capacity for culture and technology that has allowed our species to reshape the world. The story of evolution is one of constant change, adaptation, and resilience. Species come and go, ecosystems shift and transform, and the planet itself undergoes tremendous changes over geological time. Yet through it all, life persists, finding ways to survive and thrive even in the face of catastrophic challenges. The same processes of mutation, selection, and adaptation that shaped ancient trilobites and dinosaurs continue to operate today, in bacteria developing antibiotic resistance, in plants adapting to climate change, and in countless other ways subtle and dramatic. Modern humans occupy a unique position in the history of life. We are not the pinnacle or goal of evolution, but we are the only species that has developed the ability to understand evolution and our own place in the grand story of life on Earth. This understanding brings both wonder and responsibility. We have learned that we are part of nature, not separate from it, connected by bonds of descent and shared biochemistry to all other living things. We have also learned that the diversity of life around us is the product of billions of years of evolutionary history, and that species once extinct are gone forever, taking with them unique genetic information and ecological roles accumulated over millions of years. As human activities increasingly impact the planet, driving climate change, habitat destruction, and what some scientists call the sixth mass extinction, our understanding of evolution becomes ever more important. Conservation efforts to protect endangered species recognize that each species represents a unique evolutionary lineage, adapted to particular ecological roles and environments. Efforts to maintain genetic diversity within species acknowledge that this diversity is the raw material for future evolution, allowing populations to adapt to changing conditions. Understanding how species evolve and adapt helps us predict how they might respond to environmental changes and guides efforts to help them survive. The field of evolutionary biology continues to grow and develop, with new discoveries constantly refining and expanding our understanding. Advances in genetics and genomics are revealing the molecular mechanisms of evolution in unprecedented detail, showing how changes in DNA sequences translate into changes in development, physiology, and behavior. Sophisticated computer models allow scientists to simulate evolutionary processes and test hypotheses about how evolution operates. New fossil discoveries continue to fill gaps in our knowledge and sometimes surprise us with their revelations about ancient life. We now know that evolution can occur much faster than Darwin imagined, with significant changes sometimes appearing in just a few generations when selection pressures are strong. Studies of populations in changing environments, from fish adapting to polluted waters to insects developing pesticide resistance, show evolution in action. Experiments with faster-producing organisms like bacteria and fruit flies allow scientists to watch evolution happen in real time, testing and confirming predictions of evolutionary theory. The integration of developmental biology with evolutionary biology in a field called evo-devo has revealed how changes in genes that control development can produce dramatic changes in body plans and structures. Small changes in regulatory genes, which control when and where other genes are turned on and off during development, can have cascading effects, potentially explaining how major evolutionary transitions could occur through relatively simple genetic changes. This helps address questions about how complex structures like eyes or wings could evolve, showing that they typically arose through modifications of existing structures and developmental pathways, rather than appearing fully formed. The evolution of complex organs like the eye, once seen as a challenge to evolutionary theory, is now well understood. Eyes have evolved independently many times in different lineages, using similar biochemical pathways and components, suggesting that once the basic molecular machinery for light detection existed, natural selection repeatedly favored its elaboration into image-forming organs. We can trace a progression from simple light-sensitive cells, which allow organisms to detect light and shadow, to cup-shaped eyes that can determine the direction of light, to pinhole eyes that form crude images, to lens eyes like ours that form sharp images. Each of these stages provides advantages over the previous one and can be found in different modern organisms, showing that evolution of complex structures can proceed through many small, beneficial steps. Evolutionary theory also helps us understand ourselves, our behavior, and our societies. Evolutionary psychology explores how natural selection shaped human cognition, emotions, and behaviors. Many aspects of human nature, from our capacity for language to our social instincts, our tendency to form cooperative groups, and even our aesthetic preferences, can be understood as adaptations that increased our ancestors' survival and reproduction. This doesn't mean that biology is destiny or that we are slaves to our genes, as humans have remarkable behavioral flexibility and our cultures can change far faster than our genes. But it does provide insights into why we think and feel the way we do. The evolution of cooperation and altruism, behaviors that benefit others sometimes at a cost to oneself, has been a major focus of evolutionary research. How could natural selection, which seems to favor selfishness, produce organisms that help others? The answer involves several mechanisms, including kin selection, where helping relatives increases the survival of shared genes, reciprocal altruism, where helping others who may help you in return can be beneficial, and group selection, where groups with more cooperative individuals may outcompete less cooperative groups. Humans show remarkable levels of cooperation, even with unrelated strangers, suggesting our evolution in small social groups favored traits like empathy, fairness, and cooperation. Let your mind wander through the vast expanses of time we've traversed, from the formation of Earth through the emergence of life, the great diversifications and extinctions, the age of dinosaurs, the rise of mammals, the evolution of primates and humans, and finally to the present day. All of this history is written in the rocks beneath our feet, in the DNA of every living cell, in the similarities and differences among species, and in the patterns of life's distribution across the planet. The story of evolution is far from over. Life continues to evolve all around us and within us. The bacteria in your gut, the trees in the forest, the birds in the sky, all are engaged in the ongoing process of adaptation and change. New species continue to arise through the splitting of populations and the accumulation of differences. Extinctions continue to occur, both naturally and increasingly due to human activities. The environment continues to change, presenting new challenges and opportunities for living organisms. Looking to the future, evolution will continue as long as there is life on Earth. How organisms will respond to the rapid environmental changes of the Anthropocene, the current geological epoch defined by human impact on the planet, remains to be seen. Some species will adapt to changing conditions, some will shift their ranges to track suitable habitats, and sadly, many will go extinct. But if the history of life teaches us anything, it is that life is remarkably resilient and adaptable. New species will evolve to fill vacant niches, ecosystems will reorganize in new configurations, and the great story of life on Earth will continue. The diversity of life on Earth today is staggering, with estimates suggesting there may be anywhere from 8 to 10 million species of eukaryotes alone. Though only about 1.5 million have been formally described and named by scientists. The majority of these species are insects, with beetles alone accounting for roughly 1/4 of all known species. The oceans, covering more than 70% of Earth's surface, remain largely unexplored, and scientists estimate that we have described less than 10% of marine species. Microorganisms are even less well known, with potentially trillions of bacterial and archaeal species, most of which have never been cultured or studied. Each species represents a unique solution to the challenges of survival and reproduction, shaped by millions of years of evolution in particular environments. Some organisms have evolved to thrive in extreme conditions that would be lethal to most life. Thermophilic bacteria live in hot springs and deep-sea hydrothermal vents, where temperatures exceed the boiling point of water. Psychrophilic organisms flourish in Antarctic ice and deep ocean waters just above freezing. Halophiles thrive in salt concentrations that would desiccate most cells. Acidophils live in environments with pH levels similar to battery acid, while alkaliphiles prefer extremely basic conditions. These extremophiles, as they're called, expand our understanding of the limits of life and have implications for the search for life on other planets. The adaptations organisms have evolved are endlessly creative and often surprising. Consider the Arctic fox, which changes the color of its fur from brown in summer to white in winter, providing camouflage year-round. Or the bombardier beetle, which defends itself by explosively spraying a boiling, toxic chemical mixture produced by a reaction between two chemicals stored separately in its body. The electric eel can generate shocks of over 600 volts to stun prey and defend against predators. Some species of jellyfish are effectively biologically immortal, capable of reverting from their adult form back to their juvenile polyp stage and starting their life cycle over again indefinitely. Plants have evolved equally remarkable adaptations. The Venus flytrap captures and digests insects to supplement the nitrogen-poor soils in which it grows, snapping its modified leaves shut in a fraction of a second when trigger hairs are touched. The corpse flower produces the largest unbranched inflorescence in the plant kingdom and attracts pollinators by smelling like rotting flesh. Desert plants like cacti have evolved succulent stems to store water, reduced leaves to minimize water loss, and photosynthesis, which allows them to open their stomata for gas exchange at night rather than during the hot day, reducing water loss. Some plants, like the resurrection plant, can survive complete desiccation, losing up to 95% of their water content, then reviving within hours when water becomes available again. Migration represents another spectacular adaptation, with many species undertaking incredible journeys as part of their annual life cycles. Arctic terns migrate from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back each year, a round trip of roughly 44,000 miles, the longest migration of any animal. Monarch butterflies from eastern North America migrate up to 3,000 miles to specific overwintering sites in the mountains of central Mexico, a journey that takes multiple generations to complete, with the final generation living much longer than usual to make the return trip north. Pacific salmon are born in freshwater streams, migrate to the ocean where they spend most of their lives, then return to the exact stream where they were born to spawn and die. Navigating using a combination of magnetic fields, the sun's position, and chemical cues. Gray whales migrate between feeding grounds in the Arctic and breeding lagoons in Baja California, a round trip of up to 12,000 miles. The ability to navigate during these migrations is itself a product of evolution, with different species using different cues and mechanisms. Many birds can detect Earth's magnetic field and use it as a compass, with magnetic particles in their brains or special proteins in their eyes that are sensitive to magnetic fields. Some animals navigate using the sun or stars, compensating for the time of day or year. Salmon can detect and remember the specific chemical signature of their home stream. Sea turtles may use magnetic fields to navigate across open ocean to specific beaches where they hatched decades earlier. Symbiosis, close relationships between different species, has been a major driver of evolutionary innovation and ecological complexity. Lichens, which appear to be single organisms, but are actually symbiotic partnerships between fungi and algae, or cyanobacteria, have existed for hundreds of millions of years and can colonize bare rock, starting the process of soil formation. Corals are colonial animals that have symbiotic relationships with photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae living in their tissues, with the corals providing protection and nutrients, while the algae provide energy from photosynthesis, a partnership that has built the largest biological structures on Earth. Coral reefs visible from space. Many plants have symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi, which colonize their roots and extend far into the soil, increasing the plant's access to water and nutrients like phosphorus, while receiving sugars from the plant in return. Some estimates suggest that over 90% of land plants have these fungal partnerships. Other plants, particularly in the pea family, have symbiotic bacteria in root nodules that convert atmospheric nitrogen into forms the plant can use, allowing these plants to grow in nitrogen-poor soils. Perhaps the most distinctive human trait, has no true parallel in other species. While many animals communicate, human language is unique in its complexity, flexibility, and generativity, allowing us to combine a finite set of sounds or symbols to create an infinite number of meaningful messages, to discuss things that are distant in space and time, to talk about abstract concepts, hypothetical situations, and things that don't exist. The evolution of language was probably crucial to the development of complex human societies and cultures, enabling cooperation, planning, teaching, and the transmission of detailed information. The biological basis for language is still being investigated, but it's clear that humans have evolved specialized brain regions involved in language processing, particularly Broca's area and Wernicke's area, as well as anatomical features that allow for the fine control of vocalization needed for speech. The FOXP2 gene, which differs between humans and other apes, is involved in language development, and mutations in this gene can cause language impairments. Children acquire language rapidly and naturally, even creating grammatical structure when exposed only to impoverished linguistic input, suggesting that humans have evolved specific cognitive mechanisms for language learning. As you continue to relax and drift towards sleep, reflect on the incredible fact that every aspect of your own body is a product of evolution, bearing the marks of your evolutionary history. Your backbone traces back to the first vertebrates swimming in Paleozoic seas. Your four limbs reflect your descent from tetrapods that crawled onto land hundreds of millions of years ago. Your warm blood, hair, and mammary glands mark you as a mammal, descended from small furry creatures that scurried through the shadows while dinosaurs ruled. Your opposable thumbs, forward-facing eyes, and large brain are your primate heritage, evolved for life in the trees and complex social groups. Even features that seem like flaws or imperfections make sense in light of evolution. Your lower back is prone to problems because your spine evolved for a quadrupedal ancestor and has been imperfectly modified for upright walking. You are vulnerable to choking because your airway and esophagus cross, a legacy of our fish ancestors in which the breathing and eating passages were already established before we moved to land. Your appendix, once thought useless, is actually a remnant of a larger structure in herbivorous ancestors and may serve as a reservoir for beneficial gut bacteria. But it can still become infected and inflamed. You get goosebumps when cold or frightened, a reflex that would have made your hairier ancestors look larger and better insulated, but which serves little function with your sparse body hair. The human genome itself tells the story of our evolution. About 98.5% of your DNA is identical to that of chimpanzees. You share genes with fruit flies that control embryonic development, with yeast involved in cell division and DNA repair, with bacteria for basic metabolic processes. Your genome contains many non-functional remnants, pseudogenes that were functional in ancestors but have accumulated mutations and no longer produce working proteins. You have broken genes for making vitamin C, which most mammals can produce but primates cannot, having lost this ability because our fruit-eating ancestors got plenty of vitamin C from their diet. Your genome is littered with the remnants of ancient viral infections, endogenous retroviruses that inserted themselves into your ancestors' DNA and have been passed down through generations. The human immune system provides a beautiful example of evolution in action within your own body. Your immune cells recognize and attack invading pathogens through molecules that can take billions of different forms, far more than you have genes. This diversity is generated through a kind of controlled mutation and selection that occurs as immune cells develop. Genes encoding antibodies and T-cell receptors are cut up and randomly recombined, generating enormous diversity. Cells producing useful receptors are selected to survive and multiply, while those producing useless or self-reactive receptors are eliminated. When you're infected, immune cells that happen to recognize the pathogen multiply rapidly, creating an expanded population that can fight the infection. And some of these cells become memory cells that allow your immune system to respond more quickly if you encounter the same pathogen again. This is evolution by natural selection, occurring within your body over the course of weeks rather than over generations. Parasites and pathogens evolve rapidly, often in response to our immune systems and medical interventions, creating ongoing evolutionary battles. Influenza viruses mutate so quickly that new vaccines must be developed each year. HIV evolves within individual patients, sometimes developing resistance to antiviral drugs during treatment. Bacteria are evolving resistance to antibiotics at an alarming rate, a direct result of natural selection in the presence of these drugs. The bacteria that happen to have mutations conferring resistance survive and multiply, while susceptible ones are killed, leading to populations increasingly dominated by resistant strains. This is evolution occurring on human timescales, observable and measurable, and it has serious implications for medicine and public health. Cancer also represents evolution at the cellular level within an individual's body. Cancer cells are descendants of normal cells that have accumulated mutations affecting genes that control cell division, cell death, and DNA repair. These mutated cells divide uncontrollably, and as they multiply, they accumulate additional mutations, generating variation. Selection favors cells that divide fastest, evade the immune system, resist death signals, and eventually spread to other parts of the body. Different cancer cells within a single tumor can be genetically different from each other, representing an evolving population. Understanding cancer as an evolutionary process is leading to new treatment strategies, such as adaptive therapy that aims to control rather than eliminate cancer, managing it as a chronic disease while minimizing the evolution of treatment resistance. The microbiome, the community of microorganisms living in and on your body, particularly in your gut, represents an entire ecosystem that co-evolved with humans and plays crucial roles in health. Your gut contains trillions of bacteria representing thousands of species, collectively possessing far more genes than your own genome and performing functions your own cells cannot, such as breaking down certain plant fibers and producing vitamins like vitamin K and some B vitamins. These microbes are not just passengers, but are intimately involved in digestion, immune function, and even behavior and mental health. The relationship between humans and our microbiomes is primarily mutualistic, with both parties benefiting, though it can shift toward parasitism if the microbial community becomes unbalanced. The microbiome varies among individuals and populations, influenced by diet, environment, and genetics. And children initially acquire their microbiomes from their mothers during birth and breastfeeding. Changes in modern lifestyles, including widespread antibiotic use, processed diets, and reduced exposure to diverse environments, may be disrupting these ancient relationships, potentially contributing to increases in allergies, autoimmune diseases, and other health problems. Understanding the evolutionary history and ecology of the microbiome is leading to new therapeutic approaches, including fecal microbiota transplants that transfer beneficial microbial communities from healthy donors to patients with disrupted microbiomes. Evolution also shapes human life history, the pattern of growth, reproduction, and aging. Humans have an unusual life history compared to other primates, with a long period of childhood and adolescence during which we grow and learn, extended lifespans, and menopause in women, which is rare among mammals. These features likely evolved because of the importance of learning in human societies, with extended childhood allowing time to acquire the skills and knowledge needed to function effectively in complex social and technological environments. Grandmothers, freed from reproduction by menopause, may contribute to their grandchildren's success, an example of how helping relatives can be favored by natural selection. Aging itself, the gradual decline in function and increase in mortality with advancing age, is an evolved feature, not simply wear and tear. Natural selection becomes weaker at older ages because most mortality occurs earlier, so mutations that have harmful effects only late in life can accumulate. And genes that have beneficial effects early in life, even if they cause problems later, can be favored. This evolutionary perspective on aging explains why different species age at different rates depending on their ecology, and why interventions that slow aging in laboratory animals often involve genetic or dietary manipulations that affect evolutionarily conserved pathways related to growth, metabolism, and stress resistance. The field of evolutionary medicine applies evolutionary principles to understanding health and disease, asking questions such as why we are vulnerable to particular diseases, why natural selection hasn't eliminated harmful traits, and how evolutionary history affects our responses to modern environments. Many modern diseases result from mismatches between our evolved biology and modern environments. Humans evolved in environments very different from those most people experience today, with high levels of physical activity, diets rich in fiber and low in refined sugars and fats, exposure to diverse microbes, and social structures very different from modern urban societies. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and other conditions are much more common in modern populations than in hunter-gatherer groups, likely because our bodies are adapted to feast and famine cycles and regular intense physical activity, not to constant food availability and sedentary lifestyles. Our strong appetites for sweet and fatty foods made evolutionary sense when such foods were rare and valuable, providing concentrated calories and essential nutrients. But these same preferences contribute to health problems when such foods are abundant. Understanding these evolutionary mismatches doesn't mean we should try to live like our ancestors, but it can inform efforts to promote health in modern contexts. Some genetic diseases persist in populations despite natural selection because they provide advantages under certain circumstances, a phenomenon called balancing selection. The classic example is sickle cell disease, a painful and potentially fatal condition caused by a mutation in the gene for hemoglobin. Individuals with 2 copies of the sickle cell mutation have sickle cell disease, but individuals with 1 copy have sickle cell trait and are significantly protected against malaria. In regions where malaria is common, the advantage of malaria resistance outweighs the cost of some individuals having sickle cell disease, maintaining both versions of the gene in the population. Similar trade-offs may explain the persistence of other genetic variants associated with diseases. Let your mind rest now in the knowledge that evolution continues all around you and within you. The flu virus that will circulate next winter is evolving right now, mutating and being selected in hosts around the world. Bacteria in the soil and water are evolving new capabilities, sometimes in response to pollutants or antibiotics. Plants and insects are co-evolving in gardens and forests. Animals are adapting to urbanized landscapes, with some species like rats, pigeons, and cockroaches becoming specialized urban dwellers, while others like foxes and coyotes are learning to navigate human environments. Some species are shifting their ranges in response to climate change, moving toward the poles or to higher elevations to track suitable temperatures, and their life cycles are changing, with spring events like flowering, leafing out, and breeding occurring earlier. Rapid environmental changes caused by human activities are creating strong selection pressures, and evolution is responding. In areas with heavy fishing pressure, some fish populations are evolving to mature at smaller sizes and younger ages, reproducing before they're likely to be caught. Salmon populations in urban streams are evolving different migration timing to avoid peak temperatures. Peppered moths in England famously evolved darker coloration during the Industrial Revolution when soot darkened tree bark, making dark moths better camouflaged. Then evolved lighter coloration again, as pollution controls were implemented. Bedbugs have evolved resistance to pesticides. Weeds have evolved resistance to herbicides. These examples demonstrate that evolution is not just a historical process, but an ongoing one with practical implications. The fact that evolution continues to operate means that the future of life on Earth, including human evolution, remains open. Will humans continue to evolve biologically, and if so, in what directions? The answer is certainly yes. Humans will continue to evolve, as evolution is inevitable as long as there is genetic variation, heritability, and differential reproduction. However, predicting the direction of human evolution is very difficult. Cultural evolution and technology have dramatically altered the selection pressures acting on humans, and modern medicine, in particular, has reduced mortality from many causes that would have been strongly selective in the past. Some evolutionary changes in human populations are ongoing and observable. Lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk sugar into adulthood, has evolved independently in several populations with histories of dairy farming. A clear example of cultural practices, dairy farming, creating selection pressure for genetic change. Populations living at high altitudes in places like Tibet and the Andes have evolved different physiological adaptations to deal with low oxygen levels. The Bajau people of Southeast Asia, who practice freediving to depths of over 200 feet while hunting for fish, have evolved larger spleens, which may help by releasing extra red blood cells during dives. These examples show that human evolution continues and that different populations continue to adapt to their local environments and lifestyles, though gene flow among populations limits divergence. As you drift deeper into sleep, consider the unity of all life on Earth, connected through shared ancestry and shared biochemistry. The same DNA code, the same basic cellular structures, the same metabolic pathways link bacteria, archaea, plants, fungi, and animals. This unity reflects our common origin from a single ancestor in Earth's ancient oceans, and the effectiveness of certain molecular solutions that have been conserved across billions of years of evolution. At the same time, the diversity of life, the millions of species each uniquely adapted to particular ecological niches and lifestyles, reflects the creative power of evolution. The way natural selection, operating over vast timescales, can produce endless forms most beautiful and wonderful. Evolution has no foresight and no goal. It does not produce perfect organisms, but rather organisms that are good enough to survive and reproduce in their current environments. It works with the variation that exists and the constraints imposed by history and development, producing solutions that are sometimes elegant and sometimes makeshift. It is a process of constant change, populations tracking shifting environments, engaging in co-evolutionary relationships with other species, diversifying into new forms, and sometimes going extinct when they cannot adapt quickly enough to environmental changes or face catastrophic events. The study of evolution enriches our understanding of the natural world in countless ways, from the grandest patterns of life's diversity to the most minute details of cellular biochemistry. It explains the distribution of species around the globe, the similarities and differences among organisms, the exquisite adaptations we see everywhere in nature, and our own place in the tree of life. It has practical applications in agriculture, medicine, conservation, and many other fields. It unites all of biology under a single explanatory framework, making sense of disparate observations and allowing predictions about what we will find. More fundamentally, understanding evolution changes our perspective on humanity and our relationship with the rest of nature. We are not separate from or above nature, but part of it, recent arrivals in a story billions of years old, sharing ancestry with all living things. This realization can inspire both humility and wonder, humility at our small place in the grand scheme of life's history, and wonder at the improbability and beauty of the evolutionary process that produced us and everything else alive. It can also inspire responsibility, as we recognize that the diversity of life around us represents billions of years of evolutionary history that can be extinguished in an instant, and that our actions are now shaping the future of evolution on Earth in profound ways. As you surrender to sleep, let these thoughts settle gently in your mind like sediment drifting to the bottom of a quiet pond. Rest in the knowledge that you are connected to the deepest roots of the tree of life, that you carry within your cells the legacy of billions of years of survival and adaptation, and that you are witness to the ongoing unfolding of life's magnificent diversity on this beautiful blue planet. The processes that maintain life itself are marvels of evolved complexity, fine-tuned over billions of years to extract energy and materials from the environment, build and maintain living structures, and reproduce. At the molecular level, life is orchestrated by proteins, remarkable molecules built from chains of amino acids that fold into intricate three-dimensional shapes, enabling them to catalyze specific chemical reactions, transport materials, provide structural support, transmit signals, and perform countless other functions. The information for making these proteins is encoded in DNA, the elegant double helix discovered by Watson and Crick in 1953, though its role as the hereditary material was suspected earlier. DNA stores information using a four-letter alphabet, the nucleotide bases adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, abbreviated A, T, G, and C. These bases pair specifically across the two strands of the double helix, always pairing with T and G, always pairing with C. A pattern that explains how DNA can be accurately copied during cell division. The sequence of these bases along the DNA molecule encodes instructions for making proteins, with each sequence of 3 bases, called a codon, specifying a particular amino acid. The genetic code relating codons to amino acids is nearly universal across all life, one of the strongest pieces of evidence for common ancestry. To make a protein, The relevant section of DNA is first transcribed into a related molecule called messenger RNA, which carries the information from the nucleus to the ribosomes, molecular machines that translate the RNA sequence into a chain of amino acids. This central dogma of molecular biology, DNA to RNA to protein, is fundamental to all life, though we now know it's more complex than originally thought, with various forms of RNA regulation. Epigenetic modifications that affect gene expression without changing the DNA sequence itself, and occasional reverse transcription from RNA back to DNA by retroviruses. Metabolism, the sum of all chemical reactions in a living organism, provides the energy and building blocks needed for life. Organisms can be broadly classified by how they obtain energy and carbon. Autotrophs, including plants, algae, and many bacteria, produce their own organic compounds from inorganic raw materials, using energy from sunlight through photosynthesis, or from chemical reactions through chemosynthesis. Heterotrophs, including animals, fungi, and many bacteria, obtain energy and carbon by consuming organic compounds produced by other organisms. Photosynthesis, perhaps the most important biochemical process on Earth, converts light energy into chemical energy stored in sugars, using carbon dioxide and water as raw materials and releasing oxygen as a byproduct. This process, occurring in the chloroplasts of plant cells and in cyanobacteria, involves two main stages. The light-dependent reactions capture light energy and use it to split water molecules, releasing oxygen and producing energy carriers ATP and NADPH. The light-independent reactions, also called the Calvin cycle, use the energy from these carriers to fix carbon dioxide into organic molecules. Photosynthesis has been responsible for generating all the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere and forms the base of most food chains on Earth. Cellular respiration, occurring in mitochondria in eukaryotic cells, is essentially the reverse of photosynthesis, breaking down sugars using oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and usable energy in the form of ATP. This process involves three main stages: glycolysis, which breaks glucose into pyruvate and produces a small amount of ATP, the citric acid cycle, which further breaks down the carbon compounds and generates electron carriers, and the electron transport chain, where most ATP is produced as electrons flow through a series of proteins, ultimately combining with oxygen to form water. The efficiency and elegance of these pathways reflect billions of years of evolutionary refinement. Cell division is fundamental to life, allowing organisms to grow, repair damage, and reproduce. In prokaryotes, cell division is relatively simple, with the circular DNA being copied and the cell splitting into two identical daughter cells. In eukaryotes, the process is more complex due to the presence of multiple linear chromosomes housed in a nucleus. Mitosis, the standard form of eukaryotic cell division, ensures that each daughter cell receives an exact copy of the parent cell's genetic information. The chromosomes are first copied, then carefully separated and distributed to opposite ends of the cell before the cell divides. A process requiring elaborate machinery, including the spindle apparatus made of microtubules that physically pulls sister chromosomes apart. Sexual reproduction requires a different type of cell division called meiosis, which produces gametes, sex cells with half the normal number of chromosomes. When gametes from two parents combine during fertilization, the full chromosome number is restored, and the offspring receives genetic information from both parents. Meiosis involves 2 rounds of division, but only 1 round of DNA replication, producing 4 cells each with half the parental chromosome number. Critically, during meiosis, Chromosomes inherited from the mother and father pair up and exchange segments through a process called crossing over or recombination, shuffling genetic information and creating new combinations of alleles, the different versions of genes. This genetic recombination, combined with the random assortment of maternal and paternal chromosomes into gametes, ensures that each offspring is genetically unique, except in the case of identical twins. Sexual reproduction is nearly universal among eukaryotes and has clearly been favored by natural selection despite its costs, including the need to find a mate. The energy invested in producing specialized gametes and reproductive structures, and the fact that sexual reproduction produces fewer offspring than asexual reproduction for the same investment. The benefits of sex are thought to include bringing together beneficial mutations that occurred in different lineages, eliminating harmful mutations more efficiently, and most importantly, generating genetic diversity that may help populations adapt to changing environments and combat rapidly evolving parasites and pathogens. The development of a multicellular organism from a single fertilized egg is one of biology's most amazing processes, involving the precisely orchestrated expression of thousands of genes in specific spatial and temporal patterns. During development, cells divide, migrate, differentiate into specialized types, and organize into tissues and organs, all guided by genetic instructions and regulated by complex signaling between cells. Early development establishes the basic body plan, determining which end is head and which is tail, front and back, left and right. Specific genes, many highly conserved across different animal lineages, control these fundamental developmental processes. Hox genes, for instance, specify identity along the head-to-tail axis in animals, determining which segments develop which structures. Remarkably, these genes are found in similar form and playing similar roles in animals as different as insects and humans. And they're even organized in the same order along chromosomes as the body regions they control. Changes in Hox gene expression during evolution have contributed to major changes in body plans, such as the evolution of different numbers and types of limbs in arthropods, or the elongation of the body in snakes. Development is remarkably flexible and can be modified by evolution, with small changes in gene regulation producing large changes in form. This has been an important insight from evolutionary developmental biology. For instance, the presence or absence of legs in different snake species is controlled by changes in when and where Hox genes are expressed during development. The different beak shapes of Darwin's finches, adapted to different diets, result from changes in the timing and level of expression of a few genes that regulate beak growth. The evolution of butterfly wing patterns involves changes in genes controlling pigment production and pattern formation. Epigenetics, heritable changes in gene expression that don't involve changes to the DNA sequence itself, adds another layer of complexity to inheritance and development. Chemical modifications to DNA and histone proteins around which DNA is wrapped can affect how tightly the DNA is packaged, and thus whether genes can be accessed and expressed. These epigenetic marks can be influenced by environmental factors, and in some cases, can be passed from parent to offspring, providing a mechanism for environmental influences to have effects that span generations. While the role of epigenetic inheritance in evolution is still being investigated, it's clear that epigenetics is important for normal development and can contribute to variation among individuals. The nervous system represents one of evolution's most sophisticated information processing systems, allowing animals to sense their environment, integrate information, and respond rapidly. Even simple nervous systems in creatures like jellyfish and flatworms allow for coordinated responses to stimuli. More complex nervous systems, with centralized brains and specialized sense organs, evolved multiple times independently in different lineages, including vertebrates, arthropods like insects and crustaceans, and cephalopod mollusks like octopuses. The basic functional unit of nervous systems is the neuron, a specialized cell that can generate and transmit electrical signals. Neurons have a cell body containing the nucleus and other organelles, dendrites that receive signals from other neurons, and an axon that transmits signals to other cells. When a neuron is stimulated beyond a threshold, it generates an action potential, a rapid wave of electrical depolarization that travels along the axon. At the axon's end, this electrical signal triggers the release of neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that cross the synapse, the gap between neurons, and bind to receptors on the next neuron, either exciting or inhibiting it. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each forming thousands of synaptic connections with other neurons, creating networks of staggering complexity. Different brain regions are specialized for different functions, from basic life support functions like breathing and heart rate controlled by the brainstem, to sensory processing in regions like the visual cortex and auditory cortex, to motor control coordinated by the motor cortex and cerebellum, to higher cognitive functions like language, memory, and reasoning associated with the cerebral cortex, particularly the frontal lobes. Memory, the ability to encode, store, and retrieve information, is fundamental to complex behavior and learning. Short-term memory holds information temporarily for immediate use, while long-term memory can store information for extended periods, potentially for a lifetime. The process of consolidating short-term memories into long-term storage involves changes in the strength of synaptic connections between neurons, with frequently used connections being strengthened and rarely used ones being weakened, a principle often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. The hippocampus plays a crucial role in forming new explicit memories, memories of facts and events, while the amygdala is important for emotional memories. And different regions process procedural memories of how to perform skills. Learning, the process by which experience changes behavior, can take many forms. Classical conditioning, famously demonstrated by Pavlov's experiments with dogs, involves learning associations between stimuli. Operant conditioning involves learning associations between behaviors and their consequences, with behaviors followed by rewards being more likely to be repeated, and those followed by punishments less likely. Observational learning allows animals to learn by watching others, an ability particularly developed in primates and some birds. Insight learning involves solving problems through reasoning rather than trial and error. The senses provide organisms with information about their environment, and different species have evolved different sensory capabilities matched to their ecological niches and lifestyles. Vision, the ability to detect light, has evolved independently many times, with different designs ranging from simple eye spots that can only detect light and shadow, to compound eyes made of many separate units found in arthropods, to camera eyes similar in design to human eyes found in vertebrates and cephalopods. Color vision varies greatly among animals, with most mammals having dichromatic vision using two types of color receptors, while primates, including humans, typically have trichromatic vision with three types. And many birds have tetrachromatic vision, with four types allowing them to see ultraviolet light, invisible to humans. Hearing, the detection of sound waves, is important for communication, navigation, and hunting for many animals. Mammals have a characteristic ear structure with three small bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes. that transmit vibrations from the eardrum to the inner ear, where hair cells convert mechanical stimulation into nerve signals. Some animals can detect sounds at frequencies beyond human range, with dogs hearing higher frequencies and elephants detecting lower frequencies, including infrasound. Bats and some marine mammals use echolocation, emitting sounds and listening to the echoes to navigate and hunt in darkness or murky water, a sophisticated biological sonar system. The sense of smell, detecting chemical compounds in the air or water, is critically important for many animals, used to find food, detect predators, identify individuals, and find mates. Dogs have roughly 300 million olfactory receptors compared to about 6 million in humans, and a much larger portion of their brain is devoted to analyzing smells. Many insects can detect pheromones, chemical signals released by members of their own species, at incredibly low concentrations, allowing male moths to track females from miles away. Salmon use their sense of smell to recognize the specific chemical signature of their natal stream when returning to spawn. Some animals have senses with no parallel in humans. Many animals can detect Earth's magnetic field and use it for navigation, including birds, sea turtles, and salmon. Sharks and some other fish can detect electrical fields using electroreceptors, allowing them to sense the electrical activity of prey animals' muscles even if they're buried in sand. Platypuses also use electroreception to hunt for prey in murky water with their eyes closed. Some snakes can detect infrared radiation using pit organs, allowing them to sense the body heat of warm-blooded prey even in complete darkness. Behavior, how organisms interact with their environment and with each other, is shaped by both genes and experience, often referred to as the nature-nurture interaction. Many behaviors have a genetic basis and develop even without specific experience, called innate behaviors. These include reflexes, automatic responses to specific stimuli, and fixed action patterns, stereotyped behavioral sequences triggered by specific stimuli. For example, gull chicks instinctively peck at red spots on their parents' beaks to trigger regurgitation of food. And egg-laying birds will instinctively roll eggs that have rolled out of the nest back in, even rolling objects that only vaguely resemble eggs. However, even innate behaviors often require some interaction with the environment to develop normally. Birdsong, while having a genetic basis, often requires that young birds hear adult song during a critical period of development to develop normal songs themselves. Some birds are more flexible, capable of learning new songs throughout their lives, while others have a narrow window for song learning when young. Whales and dolphins also have complex vocalizations that are learned socially and can vary between populations, constituting cultural traditions. Migration in many animals is triggered by innate responses to environmental cues like changing day length, but the specific routes and destinations may be learned, passed from experienced individuals to naive ones. Young birds migrating for the first time may follow experienced adults, learning the route, or may navigate using innate compass directions, but learn specific stopover sites and wintering grounds through experience. The impressive navigational abilities of migratory animals involve multiple cues and mechanisms, including magnetic sense, sun and star compass, landmarks, and possibly even olfactory maps. Reproductive behaviors are often elaborate and species-specific, shaped by sexual selection. Courtship displays allow individuals to assess potential mates for quality and species identity, reducing the risk of wasting reproductive effort on incompatible matings. Male bowerbirds build and decorate elaborate structures to attract females, with different species having different architectural styles and decorative preferences. Fiddler crabs have one claw much larger than the other, used in displays to attract females and threaten rival males. Fireflies flash species-specific patterns to attract mates. Many fish display bright colors during breeding season, perform dances, or build nests. Parental care, common in birds and mammals but also found in some fish, frogs, and invertebrates, represents a trade-off between producing many offspring with little care versus fewer offspring with extended care. Species that produce many small offspring with no parental investment, like oysters releasing millions of eggs into the water, are following an R-selected strategy, betting on quantity. Species that produce few offspring but invest heavily in each, like elephants that give birth to a single calf after a 22-month pregnancy and then nurse and care for it for years, are following a K-selected strategy, betting on quality. Most species fall somewhere along this continuum, and the optimal strategy depends on the environment and lifestyle of the species. Cooperation and altruism pose interesting evolutionary questions, as behaviors that help others at a cost to oneself would seem to be selected against. However, cooperation can evolve through several mechanisms. Kin selection favors helping relatives because they share genes, so by helping a relative reproduce, you're helping to propagate copies of your own genes. This explains why worker bees sacrifice themselves to defend the hive, containing their mother, the queen, and their sisters. Reciprocal altruism can favor helping unrelated individuals if there's a chance they'll return the favor later, as seen in vampire bats sharing blood meals and primates forming coalitions. Cooperation can also evolve if groups of cooperators outcompete less cooperative groups, even if individual defectors have an advantage within a group. The evolution of eusociality, where some individuals forego reproduction to help others reproduce, is rare and requires specific conditions. But it has evolved independently multiple times in insects, and even in some mammals like naked mole rats. Eusocial insect colonies can be incredibly successful, with ants alone representing perhaps 15–20% of terrestrial animal biomass, despite their small individual size. The success of eusocial species demonstrates the power of cooperation and division of labor. Competition is equally important in shaping evolution. Individuals compete for limited resources like food, water, shelter, and mates. This competition can be direct, through interference where individuals fight or exclude others, or indirect, through exploitation where individuals just consume resources before others can. Different species can also compete, and when two species compete strongly for the same resources, natural selection typically favors divergence in resource use, a process called character displacement, reducing competition. This can lead to resource partitioning, where similar species coexisting in the same area use resources in different ways, such as feeding at different times, in different places, or on different foods. Predation has been a major selective force throughout the history of life, driving the evolution of defensive adaptations in prey and hunting adaptations in predators. Prey animals have evolved numerous anti-predator strategies including crypsis, camouflage, aposematism, warning colors, mimicry, armor, speed, vigilance, and living in groups where many eyes can watch for danger. Some prey animals employ more active defenses, like squid ejecting ink to confuse predators, bombardier beetles spraying hot toxic chemicals, or horned lizards squirting blood from their eyes at predators. Predators have evolved an array of hunting adaptations. Cheetahs are the fastest land animals, capable of reaching speeds over 70 miles per hour in short bursts to chase down prey. Dragonflies are aerial acrobats with excellent vision and reflexes, catching over 95% of prey they pursue. Archerfish shoot jets of water at insects above the water surface, knocking them into the water to be eaten. Anglerfish use a luminous lure dangling in front of their mouths to attract prey in the dark deep sea. Pack hunters like wolves, lions, and orcas cooperate to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Herbivory, consuming plants, is widespread and has shaped plant evolution profoundly. Plants have evolved numerous defenses against herbivores, including physical defenses like thorns, spines, and tough leaves, and chemical defenses like toxins, digestive inhibitors, and compounds that taste bad. In response, many herbivores have evolved ways to overcome these defenses, such as specialized digestive systems to detoxify plant chemicals or behavior patterns that avoid the most toxic parts of plants. This coevolutionary arms race between plants and herbivores has produced remarkable specificity, with some insects able to eat only one or a few plant species, having evolved mechanism to handle those particular plants' defenses. The relationship between plants and herbivores isn't always antagonistic. Many plants rely on animals to disperse their seeds, and they've evolved fruits that attract animals with nutritious pulp surrounding seeds that pass through the animal's digestive system unharmed and are deposited in new locations in a pile of natural fertilizer. Frugivorous animals, fruit eaters, benefit from the nutrition, and plants benefit from seed dispersal, a mutualistic relationship. The diversity of fruit types and colors reflects adaptation to different animal dispersers, with red fruits often dispersed by birds that see red well, large fruits by large mammals, and so on. Pollination mutualisms between plants and animals are even more specific and sometimes highly co-evolved. While some plants are pollinated by wind or water, many rely on animals, most commonly insects but also birds, bats, and other animals. Flowers have evolved to attract pollinators with colors, scents, nectar rewards, and sometimes deception, and their shapes often match the bodies of their pollinators, ensuring pollen is deposited on the right spot to be transferred to the next flower. Pollinators benefit from rewards of nectar or pollen for food. This mutualism is so important that many ecosystems would collapse without it, and the decline of pollinators due to habitat loss, pesticides, and disease is a major conservation concern. The organization of species into ecosystems, communities of organisms interacting with each other and their physical environment, creates higher levels of biological organization beyond individual species. Ecosystems are structured by flows of energy and cycling of materials. Energy enters most ecosystems through photosynthesis, is transferred through the food web as organisms eat and are eaten, and is eventually lost as heat. The flow of energy means ecosystems require constant input of energy from the sun. Materials like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water cycle through ecosystems, moving between organisms and the physical environment, used and reused. Food webs depict the complex network of who eats whom in an ecosystem, showing that most organisms eat multiple food types and are eaten by multiple predators. Food webs typically have several trophic levels: primary producers like plants that make their own food, primary consumers or herbivores that eat plants, secondary consumers or carnivores that eat herbivores, tertiary consumers that eat other carnivores, and decomposers like bacteria and fungi that break down dead organic matter. Energy is lost at each transfer between trophic levels, mostly as heat from metabolism, which limits food chain length and explains why biomass typically decreases at higher trophic levels, forming a pyramid of biomass. Keystone species are species that have disproportionately large effects on their ecosystems relative to their abundance. Sea otters are a classic example. They eat sea urchins, which eat kelp. Where otters are present, they keep urchin populations in check, allowing kelp forests to flourish, providing habitat for many other species. Where otters have been eliminated, urchin populations explode, overgrazing kelp and creating barren underwater deserts, affecting the entire ecosystem. Wolves in Yellowstone are another example. Their reintroduction changed elk behavior and numbers, which affected vegetation, which in turn affected other herbivores, beavers, birds, and even the physical shape of river channels. Ecological succession is the process by which ecosystems change over time, particularly after disturbances. Primary succession occurs on bare substrates like rock exposed by a retreating glacier or new volcanic islands, with pioneering species like lichens and mosses first colonizing, slowly building soil, allowing herbs and grasses to establish, then shrubs, and eventually mature forest, a process taking hundreds to thousands of years. Secondary succession occurs after disturbances like fires or abandoned farm fields, where soil is present, and succession proceeds more quickly. The climax community, the endpoint of succession, is determined by climate, soil, and other environmental factors, and is relatively stable until the next major disturbance. Biodiversity, the variety of life at all levels from genes to ecosystems, is important both intrinsically and for the ecosystem services it provides. Diverse ecosystems tend to be more stable and resilient, better able to withstand disturbances and maintain functioning. This is because species differ in their responses to environmental changes, so when one species declines, others may increase, maintaining overall ecosystem function. Biodiversity also provides direct benefits to humans through ecosystem services like pollination of crops, purification of water, regulation of climate, control of pests and diseases, and provision of foods, medicines, and raw materials. Yet biodiversity is currently declining at alarming rates, with species extinctions occurring at rates perhaps 100 to 1,000 times higher than background rates from the fossil record. The primary drivers of this biodiversity crisis are habitat destruction and degradation, overexploitation of species through hunting and fishing, introduction of invasive species that compete with or prey on native species, pollution, and climate change. These threats often interact, creating synergistic effects worse than any single threat alone. Many scientists believe we are entering Earth's sixth mass extinction event, this one caused by human activities. Conservation biology applies evolutionary and ecological principles to protecting biodiversity. Understanding that species require sufficient habitat of appropriate quality, that populations need to be large enough to maintain genetic diversity and avoid inbreeding. That connectivity between populations allows gene flow and rescue of declining populations, and that ecosystems require complete communities of interacting species, guides conservation strategies. Protected areas like national parks and nature reserves are important but insufficient alone. Conservation requires maintaining corridors between protected areas, managing landscapes outside protected areas to be wildlife-friendly, reducing threats from overexploitation and pollution, and addressing climate change. Climate change represents one of the most significant challenges for biodiversity and ecosystems. Rapid warming is shifting climate zones poleward and upward in elevation, faster than many species can migrate. Species with nowhere to go, like those already at high latitudes or elevations, are particularly vulnerable. Ocean warming and acidification, caused by absorption of excess carbon dioxide, are devastating coral reefs and affecting marine life throughout the oceans. Changes in precipitation patterns are creating droughts in some areas and floods in others, stressing ecosystems adapted to historical climate patterns. Some species are adapting to climate change through evolutionary responses, shifts in behavior or physiology, but the rate of change is so rapid that many species cannot keep pace. Range shifts are already documented for many species, with mountain species moving upslope, aquatic species moving poleward, and spring events occurring earlier. Some species are showing evolutionary responses to warming, such as birds evolving smaller body sizes or earlier breeding times. However, many species, particularly those with specialized habitat requirements, slow reproduction, or limited dispersal ability, are declining or facing extinction. As your mind drifts deeper into rest, envision the intricate web of life that covers our planet, from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks, from polar ice to tropical rainforests. Each ecosystem, each species, each individual organism represents the outcome of evolutionary processes operating over immense timescales, producing the beautiful, complex, functional systems we see around us. Every strand of the web connects to others in ways both obvious and subtle, creating a tapestry of life that sustains not only itself, but also human civilizations. Rest now in the understanding that you are part of this great web, connected through countless threads to all other life. The oxygen you breathe was produced by photosynthetic organisms. The food you eat comes from plants and animals that themselves are products of evolution and participants in ecosystems. The microbes living in and on your body are ancient partners in the dance of life. You are both a product of evolution and, through your actions, an agent affecting evolution and ecology around you. Sleep peacefully, knowing your place in this grand narrative of life on Earth.